wonder. Initial earnings were extremely good, but after about 90 days, it had peaked and was falling fairly quickly.
I joined Nintendo. I immediately found out that radar scope wasn't doing good. We had too many of them.
And Arakawa finds himself with all these radar scope machines that he can't do anything with.
All the games had to come through the Panama Canal. By the time the machines got into New Jersey, the earnings had dropped off, and so they were stuck with these machines. That's the main reason why they decided to move back to Seattle, is so that they were within 2 weeks of Japan.
So you either keep selling a product that you know no one wants, or you literally throw them into the ocean. There was no third other option, unless you came up with a game changer of an idea.
With failure looming, Arakawa had a choice. He could resign preemptively, saving face. He could blame RadarScope's failure on the US market. Or maybe there was a third option.
And so we had to call back and say, listen, I need a new video game. You need to take the RadarScope hardware. I just need to put a new game in it.
But all of Nintendo's existing game designers were busy making the next year's suite of games. So they found someone who was working there as a staff engineer who's basically painting the cabinets and said, can you make a game because everyone else is busy? That guy was Shigeru Miyamoto.
Hello, I'm Shigeru Miyamoto, a game developer of Nintendo.
Raised by parents who enjoyed the theater and popular culture, young Miyamoto grew up to become a free spirit. At a young age, he loved American westerns, science fiction movies, and was obsessed with bluegrass music and the banjo. His upbringing and personal taste evolved to create a truly unique and inventive imagination. After graduating from the Kanazawa Municipal College of Industrial Arts with a degree in industrial design, Shigeru, or Shiggy as his friends called him, was a bit lost. He loved manga, or Japanese comics, but was unsure if he could break in.
He had worked on other arcade games. He had done cabinet art and things like that and done some graphics, but Miyamoto had never directed a game. But anybody else who had ever directed a game at Nintendo was busy. So this was Miyamoto's big chance. All right, Shigeru Miyamoto, we need you to make a game. Originally, Miyamoto was going to make a game about Popeye.
Good morning, sweetheart.
The Popeye deal fell through, but that's where Miyamoto kind of started. And he thought, okay, well, we've got this interesting love triangle between Popeye and Bluto and olive oil. But the story that Miyamoto kind of came up with is, well, this trainer is kind of mean. And so Donkey Kong, he was being mistreated by this guy who was his trainer. Then he was just like, I'm sick of this. He busts out, he grabs the guy's girlfriend, and he takes off, up the side of a building.
Waiting for our next new game from Nintendo and couldn't wait for its arrival, and one late afternoon it arrives, and here we have this game called Donkey Kong. Al immediately just got up and left and went to our local restaurant.
We looked at that name and we said, oh God, how can we sell this?
So we asked NCL in Japan, all right, let's change the name of the game. We think this will be just fine. And they responded, we can't change the name of the game.
When I started there, Nintendo was small, 5 people, and it was literally Mr. Arakawa, Ron Judy, Al Stone, Don James, myself, and John Pedersen. And we were the guys who did all of the work of converting the games over.
Mr. Arakawa, he'd buy a case of beer. Several of us and even some of the employees' wives would join, and we'd start converting some of the games over to Donkey Kong. So we'd stay there till probably midnight, sometimes after, working on converting machines.
Here we are out here in the days of all the space games trying to sell our distributors on a game called Donkey Kong. But we did our own testing at a local bar and restaurant called the Spot Tavern, and we put in one machine, and boy, it out-earned all the other games there. We added a second game. They were both earning pretty much maximum. We added a third game, and it did the same thing, and at that point we realized this was definitely a very hot game.
It's Donkey Kong, the arcade sensation, and now you can play it at home.
Space Invaders had been a huge worldwide hit. Pac-Man had been a huge worldwide hit. Donkey Kong now becomes the next big hit. It is unlike anything anybody has ever seen.
I remember seeing this game. I mean, you have so many of the arcade games that are space or a sport. Then you have this other game with this giant gorilla with this Italian plumber trying to run up these ramps. And I remember just thinking, like, that's kind of bizarre.
When I first played the Donkey Kong arcade machine, I remember it being excruciatingly hard.
When you first pick up that hammer, you have no concept of the timing on it. It just disappears when you're about to hit a barrel and then you die immediately.
All the perfect trappings of a great arcade game. It looked really easy, but it was challenging and hard, and if you made a mistake, you wanted to immediately play again.
We were all very, very impressed with Donkey Kong.
I found it to be addictive. So
when you completed the first level, you got to a whole different screen.
Back then, they basically made it a second game. You were playing the sequel alongside the original. And then level 3 is different than level 2. And then level 4 is different than the other ones.
You have to get good at 3 different games, because I never get to the 4th level of Donkey Kong, which is the cement factory.
All I wanted to do was get to the end so that I could see what that next change was going to be. And everything else didn't matter. It was like just the sort of reveal that was coming at the ends of each one of these.
There's very few games, especially in the early 80s like this, in which you controlled a human being. Very, very few. Versus a spaceship or an abstract shape like Pac-Man. This was the guy running around, jumping, climbing, falling.
The experience was, to me, a revelation about how strong narrative gameplay could be.
In most video games, you put your coin in, then you press start, and immediately you're playing the game. That's not the case in Donkey Kong. You put your coin in and you press start, and you see a little cinematic scene of Donkey Kong holding Pauline in his arms as he climbs up the ladders, stomps on the girders, warps them and turns them diagonal, and then places Pauline on her pedestal and she shouts, "Help, help." That's way more cutscenes, if you will, than any arcade or home video game had at that point. This was really using the language of a video game, not just text, to tell a story.
Cartoon-like graphics, sort of a fairy tale
Nothing like that had really been in the arcades before.
Donkey Kong probably made me a gamer.
The thing about Miyamoto, and he's talked about this, is it starts with kind of feeling. He talks about growing up, and so many of his fun times as a kid have influenced the games that he's built, and you feel that. They feel very human.
このビデオテープで Nintendo のテレビゲームがどのようにして出来上がるかがご理解いただけたと思います。
So when I first played Donkey Kong, I thought, can you have a career doing this? This is actually a job? I am so in.
Clean shot of her playing Donkey Kong.
So when we would start these up in the warehouse, we would have 50 of them all lined up, and you go and you'd start all 50, and it would make this great noise when you're playing.
In the early 80s, all the Nintendo games have these musical chords, and there's a big speaker right in the front of the cabinet. If you're 8, 9, 10 years old, it's hitting you right in the chest. If you're not 10 years old in 1982, I don't know how I can recreate the visceralness and the revelation of that experience for you.
What happens when an unstoppable force comes into contact with an immovable object? Conflict. Sid Sheinberg, the head of Universal Studios at the time, saw the success of Donkey Kong and couldn't ignore the similarities to Universal's on-screen ape. When Sheinberg's top lawyer told him how much money this new Donkey Kong company was making off the game, they both decided it was time to take action and claim what they believed was theirs.
Nintendo was embroiled in a lot of lawsuits in the 80s and early 90s that all sort of emerged from the company's explosive success and popularity. And Universal looked at the success of Donkey Kong and said, hey, you ripped us off. This is a copy of King Kong, and we own King Kong, so you owe us a whole bunch of money.
So they decided to sue Donkey Kong on the basis that it was too similar to their own property, King Kong. And there's some validity to that claim because Donkey Kong and King Kong are both very large gorillas named Kong who are at the top of buildings terrorizing people and holding girls hostage.
A lot of people speculate where Mr. Miyamoto got his inspiration, and I think that he probably did pull a little bit from King Kong for Donkey Kong. Certainly the femme fatale being in the hands of the monkey.
King Kong was so world famous. I mean, the original movie came out in 1933. It was one of the most action-packed movies anybody had ever seen. You know, he's climbing the building, he's falling from the building, there's the girl, and it's hard to imagine that he wasn't influenced by that.
Maybe Miyamoto-san had inspiration for Donkey Kong from King Kong, but you know, it's all grist for the mill. You know, when you work in pop culture, video games, technology, everything you absorb kind of goes inside your creative mind and gets recycled.
It's almost like he made King Kong sort of a more adorable character, but now you're just going to beat him with the plumber.
Universal wanted a piece of the pie. So, in the spring of 1982, Universal City Studios Incorporated sued Nintendo Company Limited. They expected an easy win.
When Donkey Kong was being sold, it made $180 million its first year, which is a lot. And then its second year, it made another $100 million, which is, again, a lot of money. So Nintendo was sitting on this throne of money, and Universal, the film company, decides we want to get into this business too, but it's much easier, instead of designing a hit video game and selling it and then hoping to get another throne of money, to simply take someone else's throne of money.
It didn't matter what size we were as a company. It mattered to us that we were Nintendo and we had products that were beloved and that we loved. And so when we were going to legally fight against someone, it did not matter to us the size of that company, whether they were small or whether they were big or what it would take.
Surprising everyone but themselves, the little company that could stood up to the bully and scored a victory in court. A huge one.
And what ends up coming out is that King Kong had already passed into the public domain. Universal no longer had any claim whatsoever to King Kong.
The chain of title, a legal term meaning Universal owns King Kong, did not exist. So the judge found that Universal knew it did not own the rights to King Kong, but tried to sue Nintendo based on its copyright claim. And the judge was not happy about that at all, threw the case out, and said that even if they had a valid claim, King Kong could not be copied by Donkey Kong because Donkey Kong counts as parody of King Kong.
You know, this is a very long and protracted legal battle, but Nintendo stood up to this giant, this monolith, and came out smelling like a rose and won.
Take your cassette out of its case.
Personal computers.
Comes with a monitor.